without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Yvonne McGuican. I hope I've said that correctly, Yvonne, who's going to talk about her work on the thematic review of youth offending services during COVID-19 pandemic. And she is one of Her Majesty's Inspectors for Probation with special focus on youth justice. So without further ado, please, here's Yvonne.
Thank you very much, Kate. Firstly, can I say thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you today about this piece of work. What I thought it would be useful to do is just give you a little bit of background and then go into some of the challenges that we found around work during this period. And then, as Kate has requested, to focus on contact and responses and the recommendations that we've made and learning points. There is a PowerPoint summary that goes alongside this, which I'm sure will be sent out to people kind of as part of the organisation of the seminar. So the first thing to say is that we looked at the work of 7 youth offending services during the first period of the lockdown. So their work between March and June this year. Thank you. If you can go to the next page, that's great. That's great. Thank you. And we highlighted 70 cases that we wanted to look at. So that's our usual methodology, looking at work in a level of detail. We specifically highlighted those cases where there were higher levels of risk to others and safety and wellbeing issues for children. We did a staff survey so that we can understand the staff's responses to this period, and undertook a range of focus groups with a wide range of people. So headline findings. Very quickly, youth offending services identified that there were some children quite a significant shift in their needs, especially around safety and wellbeing. And that was that interplay between contextual safeguarding, those risks that come from outside of the family home, and those risks that present from within the family. And what YOTS were able to do was to review cases really quickly so that they could accurately identify which children they felt were priority to keep contact with during this period. And that shift happened quite quickly. So we found, for example, for some children where the greatest risk came in terms of exploitation, coming back into the family home and being supported back within the family actually protected them. But for other children, risk really exacerbated during this period. And the report outlines a couple of case examples where that has happened. The YOTS responded really quickly and moved their service delivery primarily to online and digital platforms. Everybody became an expert in Teams. It seemed to be overnight, but it was a long time in the planning. And for most YOTS, that was effective. What we saw was one of the immediate kind of problems that came around was the issue around what was happening with courts and within custodial settings. So I was able to join early meeting of YOTS managers in Wales along with the YJB, and they'd already highlighted this problem. So as courts closed, the existing backlog built quite quickly, and that's a problem and an issue that YOTS are still working through at this moment in time. And we've been able to provide some data in the report about the increase and the potential impact of that moving forward. And in fact, we've made a recommendation to YOT management boards to understand what that's going to mean for services going forward. Contact with children in custody was problematic from really early on for some fairly obvious reasons. So youth custodial estate trying to manage the COVID pandemic and increasing cases within their own establishments, but of course the technology that we to keep in contact virtually is not readily available, and I know that's something that the prison service are working on at this moment in time. But that was a barrier to many services keeping contact with children and ultimately impacted on resettlement work. There was no single business continuity model, so no prescribed method of working during this period. And actually, we think that that was a benefit. What that allowed was for youth offending teams to to do what they always do, which is work in partnership with their partners and develop a localised response. It also meant that they could be agile and flexible to changing needs. Out of court work continued, as did risk panels. Most of those went on a virtual basis. But the out of court work was really interesting for us because that continued at least a steady state, if not it increased for most yachts. And what yachts were able to do with their partners was to use that incident where that child became known to them, again as an opportunity to highlight if the child needed any wider safeguarding and support. In-person contact with children who were at the greatest risk was maintained in most cases, and we found some really innovative methods for keeping in touch. Most common was a system that became known as walk and talk. So when staff were able to do so, when it was safe for staff to do so, meeting children in their gardens or outside of the family home and going outside for some exercise with them. We saw bike rides as well. And what that did was it provided a really valuable opportunity for children to talk about their experiences during lockdown, and for families to have a little bit of respite for children who were sometimes displaying some quite problematic behaviour. Cumbria have an allotment. I think they're quite unusual in having an allotment, and that and many of their children and young people as being a really good way to get out of the family home in a safe way when a lot of children were worried about doing that, to meet with their professionals and their key work. That focus on children's safety and well-being continued throughout the period that we were looking at, and we found many examples of staff going beyond taking extra steps to keep children safe, but also keep them busy. So things like reparation at home we saw. One of the things that we found when we spoke to parents was that they felt much more involved in what was happening from the work of the yacht during the lockdown period, because often they were being asked to deliver some work. So that, I think, is something to bear in mind as we move forward. One parent said to us, what used to happen was the yacht worker would pick my child up from the prow, take him off, do the work, and then he'd come home. I now know what work they're doing and I can support that. So that, I think, was quite an important finding for us. If we can go to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So this work wasn't without its challenges. And the things that came up, the things that I'd like to highlight for focus as we kind of continue to go through various periods of lockdown and altered work. First one is the digital divide, and this will come as no surprise to many of you. But in the cases that we looked at, almost half of the children didn't have access to suitable IT. So what we found was either there was a lack of the technical kit, laptops, tablets, smartphones, or poor signal, or there were issues of cost of using broadband packages. It was quite a complex picture. But we were surprised at the levels of children that didn't have access to some form of virtual communication method. And for some of those that did have it, it was often shared. So we came across one example of a mum who was trying to work from home remotely using a smartphone, two children who were trying to undertake work from school via the same smartphone, and the yacht were trying to kind of do some work with their child, with one of the children as well. So quite a difficult situation. We came to the conclusion that for the future and for going forward, that the assessment of children's access to IT and virtual methods of communication should be a standard part of assessments. It's not part of the asset assessments at the moment, but there are many benefits for children for working remotely, and that's something that we think it's almost now a utility. So that assessment will be good going forward. In terms of educational provision, we know that this group of children, this cohort of children, often struggle to thrive within an educational setting, and that again has been exacerbated for children. So very few accessing school, even though some of them were entitled to go into school. So that kind of shift. And again, one of the things we've got as one of our learning points in the report is for that consideration around how those children are going to be re-engaged back into education, given the break that they've had. Talked a little bit about contacting children in custody that made that resettlement planning difficult. Very limited visits and limited online contact for those children, and that is still a very much a live issue for many services. As I said, HMPPS are working on that, so any kind of movement forward will be welcome for us. We did find some examples of some good contact with children in custody prior to release, but it was based on the relationship that the worker had with the child and the child wanting to talk to that worker. So again, that underpinning understanding of that trusting relationship very much came to the fore during this piece of work. One of the things that concerned us greatly was the issue of child and adolescent to parental violence, where that increased during the lockdown period. And often that was exacerbated by the fact that the parent was part of the risk management process. So the partnerships and the additional methods that would be in place to help manage risk during that period were removed, and parents were often left in a situation trying to kind of manage some very, very difficult behaviours. We've thought long and hard and taken quite a lot of advice about this issue, and initially we were wondering whether a move to the MARAC type arrangements for children who were under 16 might be a short-term solution. Having taken some advice from Professor Rachel Condry at Oxford University, who's also published a piece of research around the same time, we've referenced that in our report. What we're calling for is a national review of the way that issue is identified, assessed and managed going forward. This is not a new issue for many youth offending teams, but it's certainly got worse, and the provision for victims during this period we found was particularly poor. The interplay and the dynamics when the person who's harming you is your child is very different than it is within an intimate relationship. So we're calling for some changes and some consideration to assist yachts to manage this situation in the future. About the dogs, out of area placements during lockdown. One of the things that we found was that children who were placed in mainly children's residential during this period, there were very good reasons for children to be placed in placement. However, what we found was there wasn't always a benefit for a child to have their case moved from their home yacht to their host yacht. People were working remotely, and we felt that on some occasions a process had been followed rather than really thinking, is this an opportunity for us to keep some continuity for the child? So it was a small group of children, but an important group, we felt. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide if that's possible. Thank you. So response from children. What we found was there were two main groups of children in terms of their responses. Some children did well during this period, so use the opportunity to reflect about the things that were happening within their lives and to review where they wanted to go forward. But this was a much smaller group. The vast response from children and young people during lockdown was this response to their needs becoming much more acute, and their behaviour responding to that became a very difficult period of time. And over time what we found was that children really struggled to comply with the rules around lockdown. So children still going missing, complying initially, but then going missing during that period, and relationships with parents really becoming fragmented. So going forward, that need for real consideration around emotional and mental health support. For all children during this period, a lot of their safety nets, all those desistant factors have been removed, but for this particular group of children, it's become much more acute around that. And we are very much of the view that we, during the period that we looked at, very much only scratched the surface around those needs. As children are back now in contact with services, what we expected and what we are seeing is children are disclosing around their additional needs and their experiences during lockdown. So there's a big piece of work there for yachts. If I could just say in the last minute or two something about this specific approach to Wales. We were really pleased to see that opportunities were taken to build on existing relationships between Youth Offending Services, the YJB and the Criminal Justice Network to learn during this period. So we'd noted really early on that Wrexham Youth Offending Team had posted and publicised a business continuity model, gave people the opportunity to look that. And we know that they were not the only yacht that did that. But that collaboration through that period and that desire to continue to learn and improve things was really impressive in Wales, and we've no reason to believe that that's not going to continue. Next slide, please. I've listed on the rest of the handout that will come round to you the recommendations that we've made. We've made 6 in total, some for various people, and you can see from the slide there that what we focused in on are those things that we think will make the biggest difference quickly as we go forward. So issues around parental violence will take longer to work out, hopefully a national approach to that, but work to protect victims, we're hoping that some work can start on that as soon as possible, especially around thinking around those particular dynamics within that situation. Next slide, please. There we go. Some work for yacht teams and for yacht management boards as well, looking at some of the issues that we've identified. And then on the next slide, thank you, some learning points. One of the learning points that we've raised on here is the particular issue. There's 2 particular issues I draw to your attention. So that children valued remote contact with yacht workers during the initial part of their engagement. So for children, what they told us was that they liked the fact that they could get to know workers by telephone or by and they felt that it was less intense. And we know that during that first contact with yacht, it is often a very intense period while we're doing assessment processes. So they really, really valued that. But that was very much time limited. Once they'd begun to build that relationship, they wanted then and valued that direct contact. So that's something kind of going forward we think is worth further consideration. Meeting in the community has been a real success, and we think there's an opportunity to build on that. And one of the things that the children told us was it kind of changed the power dynamic. They're not their words, they're my words, but it changed that power dynamic and gave them some control about where they saw work in their community. But they very much felt that staff were able to kind of see them in their own context, and they thought that that was really valuable. There is something about testing for a very small group of children that we came across, and those were children who were placed out of area and children being released from custody. And there are no testing arrangements, and there were no testing arrangements for those children. And that meant that those children spent longer in isolation, and that was a huge frustration for that small group of children when they were moving from residential home to residential home. For some yachts, that won't be an issue if you've not got residential service in your area, but for some yachts, this is a huge issue. For Shropshire Youth Offending Service that have 72 children's residential services in their area, this was a huge consideration for them. And we spoke to a young person who'd spent 6 of 12 weeks in isolation because he'd had 3 moves of residential provision. He was 14 and he was struggling to understand why that was his situation. I'm really conscious of time. I've gone over. I can see that already. Our report has been published. It was published last week, and there is a link to that report on the handout for you to have a look at. And I'm going to draw to a close there just by saying, in summary, we were impressed by the work that youth offending teams did, their ability to respond quickly to an unprecedented situation. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Kate, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. That was really interesting. And with pressure of time, I'm going to move straight on to the next set of presenters. We've got presenters from 2 yachts. I want to ask Carmarthenshire Youth Offending Service to speak to us first, and that's Davinia Harris-Davis who's their Youth Justice Team Manager, and James Purdue, who's the Senior Practitioner, and they're both from Carmarthenshire Yachts. Thank you.
Great, diolch Kate. Prynawn da to you all, and like Kate, like Yvonne, can I also thank the University of South Wales and the Centre for Crime and Social Justice for the invite to address you from a Welsh yacht perspective today. We haven't got a PowerPoint presentation, just a face, like the children who we've been supervising have had sort of during this time. The fact that we are here today in the middle of a pandemic demonstrates that we are willing to reflect and to be honest about the challenges faced by yachts in Wales and the lessons learnt. Benjamin Franklin famously said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So pre-lockdown here in Carmarthenshire, which is a large geographical mixture of town versus rural landscape, we identified the risks and needs in partnership with other people. We completed a RAG status, a red, amber, green status on each and every court and out of court case on a template which looked at risk of serious harm, safeguarding concerns and any other needs, so that we could prioritise the type of contact and support that child needed. Here in Carmarthenshire, staff were encouraged very much to be flexible and creative, as we always are, we try and be, in engaging in children, and the child first approach was a greater need than ever. This included responding to crises, and I'll just give you a few examples, be that a young person threatening to jump from a 5-storey building with a case manager called in to coordinate a plan with police on negotiating tactics to prevent the fall, a court case where a positive COVID symptoms were suspected from the child, which resulted in the hearing leaving the courtroom and held at the steps of a GOME van with judge and yacht worker present, as well as numerous staff positively taking children for socially distancing activities, including cycling, as already been mentioned, canoeing and beach walks in rural Carmarthenshire. Although this is not new to us here in Carmarthenshire, it's just it made it more limited with social distancing and the guidelines. You know, I believe that staff's knowledge of their existing cases at the point of lockdown by completing the RAG status was a strength. However, as new cases came to the attention of the yacht, either from within the county or on a caretaking basis, this presented greater challenges in building rapport and meaningful relationships. As Yvonne has mentioned, with this comes the adaptation of practice from staff, children, families and victims in terms of the digital facilities and the digital divide, and confidentiality as well, and internet issues when working from home. All staff here in Carmarthenshire was set up with a work Facebook Messenger account prior to lockdown, so that communication on a virtual face-to-face basis was possible. This also required patience, trial and error, and listening to the voice of the child more than ever as to what worked for them. Needless to say, the amount of telephone contacts increased, as some children, despite the belief that they live on social media, did not want to engage in that particular way. In order to look at the further challenges and positive factors, I'd like to introduce you to James Purdue, who is the senior practitioner within the team, to look at those further challenges and positive factors. James.
Okay, thank you, Davina. So I'm just going to briefly run over some of the challenges that we experienced, and also some of the things that we felt have gone well. And I think probably what you'll notice as I go through the list now is there's a lot of commonality with what's already been highlighted. So in terms of the challenges, then we found that in one sense, engaging children could be problematic. Some of those actually struggled with using the online or telephone contact. And I think we found particular issues sometimes with children that had no previous contact with the service. I think there's also a challenge for staff doing assessments remotely. I think there's some of those things that you only get from that face-to-face contact in a child's home in particular was lost, and I think sometimes staff felt that presented a particular challenge in terms of conducting and carrying out a really detailed assessment. Access to technology. Just prior to the lockdown, I think 2/3 of the staff in the yacht were still using what are described as brick phones. that weren't sort of internet enabled. So there was a technology challenge for staff, but also, again, as already mentioned, for some children that didn't have access to some of the technologies that we tend to assume that all children have these days. There was also an issue, we had a young person with custody, so that was a particular challenge. And I think as well, whilst we did a lot of socially distanced sort of remote contacts in the community, that does raise a particular challenge when you are trying to address and manage sensitive issues. I think the best analogy would be, it's a bit like if we were asked to carry out a doctor's appointment whilst walking through town or walking through the park. I think it's a time and a place when certain issues and risks and sensitive topics, you can struggle to do that in those kind of environments. In terms of what went well, I think we found that the children with pre-existing relationships with yacht staff continued their really good engagement using the new approach, and that was almost seamless. And also those children that were comfortable and confident using technology were able to engage well as well. There's a greater flexibility from staff in terms of how they were engaging with children. We've already mentioned, I think we found that we had improved contact with parents and carers, because often we were going through them, we were sending them information directly, and that improved the level of contact and communication. I think the different types of contact, the different activities also helped build relationships. And I think for staff, they felt that built on a lot of the enhanced case management and trauma-informed work that we do within Carmarthenshire, and therefore it was a kind of applying those principles to other children that we work with. And we also felt that there's been an improvement from using virtual panels. So one of the problems we have in Carmarthenshire is the rurality and its families accessing and being able to attend bureau panels and review panels, whereas using that virtual approach meant that often we were getting far better engagement from those families, and that issue was resolved. So I think, there's a sort of a mixed picture there, and hopefully you can see that there's a sort of patterns already emerging from our experiences within Carmarthenshire. So that basically concludes what I wanted to say. I'm very, very aware that I've gone through that very quickly, but that's a kind of a summary of the challenges that we've experienced and some of the practice that we feel that's gone well.
Thank you very much, both of you from Carmarthen. We're now going to move to Newport Youth Offending Service, and to Caroline Ryan Phillips, who's the service manager and integrated family support worker there, and Kim Herniman, who's the acting team manager at Newport Youth Justice Service.
Okay, thank you, Kate.
Thanks.
I just checked that Kim is alongside me somewhere. Are you there, Kim? She'll pop up.
She'll pop up in a minute, I'm sure, Caroline.
Okay.
Try and
that's fine. I can make a start. I would do to
Can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I'll just make a start. Thank you very much for inviting us and giving us an opportunity to just give a very brief overview of how things have been done within Newport in Gwent, down in South Wales. It's been a really, really busy time for the service, I have to say. A lot of what's already been highlighted by Yvonne and Davinia and James are certainly recurring themes from Newport. But I think for me, just the one message I want to give before I hand over to Kim is just to say that there was a huge, fantastic response from the team in what was a very, very frantic and quick shift from working from normal office arrangements and ways of working to working from home and in this very different virtual world. So it was a massive credit to the team, I have to say, in terms of how they managed that so brilliantly. So incredibly proud to be associated with that service. And also just to kind of quickly say that certainly for Kim and I, our main driver in all of this is staying focused on what matters to the child, the voice of the child, our concern for these children and what was happening in terms of lockdown and services disappearing, and actually who was around to hold them, keep them safe and be a voice and advocate for them. So that was very much our driver for how we maintain services and developed our services in a very creative fashion as we went into lockdown, and actually we continue to this day. So that's just to set the scene in terms of what our overriding concerns were. And then I'll hand over to Kim now, who was much closer to the operational delivery than myself, who will talk you through some of those specific areas to bring them to life. Is that okay? Over to you, Kim. Next slide.
Thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as you can see, there's a list on here. A lot of them have been referred to already, but I suppose Newport is very different to Carmarthen, and I suppose some of our responses reflect that, in that, you know, the same issues about losing the direct contact and all the issues that go with that. So I won't go through all those, because our issues in respect of the ones mentioned previously were the same. So rather than waste that time, I'll just look at the differences. So what we found is we found a different response to Carmarthen, and I think that's probably a geographical thing in terms of engagement on a virtual basis. We did find that the children like to engage on a virtual basis. Our engagement initially, as Yvonne said, rose and then it dropped slightly, but we've now got to a point where we recognise that the families needed to be involved in that virtual input so that we could engage the child within the system of the family, because previously, very much as Yvonne again alluded to, was that the child was taken perhaps from school or PRU or whatever, taken to do their piece of work, taken home, and almost the family didn't be part of that. So what we've done now is we've changed all our panels to virtual as a response to COVID, but it's something we now see as good practice. Our engagement has risen phenomenally, but it also that includes the parents, and I think a big thing for me is about the engagement of parents and actually holding them to account, because they are legally responsible for the children, and very often the children seemed a bit isolated without the parent. And I think probably some of that was down to us, you know, and the way that we managed to work. So in terms of the COVID crisis, what it made us do was rethink our whole strategy. So what we did quite quickly is we recognised the increase in anxiety and all the things you see there listed. There was no safe place there. What was the hidden harm of the children that were stuck in the homes with people that may have been abusing them, or that they were abusing, as we've heard. And so we had to look at that. And so the quickest route we could do to try and respond to that was engage our partners and sort of say, right, okay, so this has happened. Nobody could predict it. Nobody knows. There's no blueprint for it. What are you doing in your individual agency, and how does that marry with the rest of us, so that we can rethink our plan, regroup, and act accordingly? And that's what we did, I think, in terms of the court, in terms of our partners. The court had a huge backlog, but when they did start to address that backlog, we found that they worked with us really well in trying to increase the out of court disposal so that we could manage on a local level. So can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So it's what we did then. So we, as I said, the regroup started. Key message was business as usual. We're still here. You're still important, and so is your family. But we're in a really difficult situation here, and you've got to work with us to get things right. And I say that because one of our engagements quite heavily was with the police, where we looked at our high-risk group of young people and recognised that they weren't following the COVID expectations in terms of safety to themselves and their family members and the community. So we formed a partnership which was to monitor high-risk individuals who were still going out in the community and possibly spreading the virus, or spreading, carrying the virus around. So we did that on a weekly basis. We kept a list of high-risk people and we monitored them very closely. The police then would then visit the parents and say, did you know where your child was? And that proved very helpful, because we noticed a decrease in the young people accessing the community when they shouldn't have done. And that sort of down a little bit for us to work with them. So that partnership worked incredibly well. What we also did with the police is our police officer managed to initially, I always thought the police were far ahead of us, but initially we were on Teams, but the police weren't, and they didn't have that access. So we used a system called WebEx. But quite quickly, the police then got onto Teams. And what our police officer now does for our panels, telephones the families the day before, talks them through, and actually helps them access Teams so that they're ready for the panel. They're not afraid of that technology, and that they access the panel quite quickly. The other thing that has helped us do is it's helped us with looking at meaningful ways of capturing the child's voice. So we'd use questionnaires, we'd use viewpoint, we've used visits in the past, but what we do now is we capture them live in panels on a virtual basis. We've rejigged our bureau form and our referral order form so it captures the child's voice. How did you find working with this person? How did you find the work? Did you know what your plan included? And with the use of Teams, I share the plan. We've made it a My Plan, which is very child friendly. We share it on the screen and I go through it and I say, do you know what this means? So that we can be clear that not only have they got a voice, they've got an understanding. I then say to the parents, what was your understanding? Is this the same as what you thought before you came here? That's proved really helpful, and it gives us a way of also asking the parents, is there anything we could have done differently that would have helped you? So that helps us then develop our service delivery. Education sort of completely shut down apart from key worker provision, but what we've got, we use our education worker, bless her, to the absolute limit, and she headed up a partnership group where we looked at resources that could be provided to children within the homes, and that included our speech and language worker who looked at children with additional learning needs, and we got a very robust resource pack in place quite quickly, and I was really impressed with the way that they came together to do that. We then identified a consistent link for the court COVID and because of her locality, but then we've carried on with that because that's another thing we've seen that is actually reaping dividends there. We maintained the contact in the same way as other people have said. We did the walk and talk, we've been out the garden, we've sat in the front garden, we've had to be careful of confidentiality, but I won't go into all that because others have, and we've all encountered the same difficulties and overcome the same challenges. But the other things that I think where Caroline mentioned now is that what we also did is we regrouped with our team, because a lot of our team were really, really thrust into isolation, not knowing how to, I use Teams for my team meeting. What do I do to get hold of someone else? And these were very real issues, not just for them, but for us. So what we did is we carried on our team meetings. We introduced a wellbeing forum all on Teams, and the wellbeing forum, unlike the team meetings, is all not about work. So you bring something to talk about, you don't bring anything, you bring coffee and cake. We all sit there for 1 hour every month, and we just talk about if things are getting us down, if things, things to celebrate, what you're going to do after this and that type of thing. That's proved incredibly supportive to the team. And I think what we did is we said to them, look, this is really difficult, but if you tell us your difficulties, we'll try and support those. And I think in turn, what happened is we grew as a team because we knew they were a great team, but perhaps they weren't as cohesive as they are now. And I think by looking at their difficulties in managing their work, being flexible with the way we allowed them to work, so perhaps splitting their days or being flexible with their hours, then, we were able to support them. And then the next slide, I'm just coming to the end now. The challenges are very similar to everyone else. As I said, I've spoken to partners and I've actually gone ahead of myself here, which is a good thing, so it cuts down the time. The anxiety and the emotional well-being, we have looked at all our community links to try and keep an eye on children in the community. We've got a community link worker who manages the 4 hubs, and she develops the relationships with them. We've now got an agreement that once we can access them and work from them. And the last slide, yes, yeah. Kate?
It's gone well over time. Could you?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so the positive outcomes, as I say, is the use of the virtual resources. The children have a much better voice, a louder voice, reassured that they're not forgotten, easier for families to engage, and improve child-focused practice.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Yeah. That's quite all right. I was behind. Everyone was behind.
Thank you. Worry about the time factor. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. We need to move on now to the next group. I didn't interrupt Kim earlier, partly because there is a problem with the voice from the children. The Media Academy Cardiff and Daniel Davis and Joseph work with Cardiff Youth Offending Team, that they had put in a lot of work over 3 or 4 days to get this ready for us yesterday. And then there's an IT issue and they can't access any of it. So they very kindly, Daniel and Joseph, agreed to come on and précis for us what the children wanted to say to us. They're going to continue to try to access the PowerPoint, and it was all recorded, and all the recordings. And if they manage it, then we will add it when we put this on, when we put the recorded version online. Okay, so over to you, Daniel and Joseph. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hi.
Thank you.
Well, basically, you've introduced some of the dilemmas then that we've faced, but thank you very much. There's a bit of context on that. So the feedback involved 5 young people that were willing to come in with the safe social distancing measures and engage in this process. And it was young people that took part in the filming process, as well as sort of organising and editing. So it's all sort of young person centred, young person led. But we will do our best now in this time, in this space, to give the responses. So the first question that came out to the young people was to give a brief summary on how they felt the YJS had engaged with them during COVID.
So yeah, just to summarise their answers, they thought the engagement was good and they actually enjoyed the weekly calls. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they enjoyed the weekly calls, and even some of them said they would have liked to have more than 1 call a week.
Yeah, yeah, which is really interesting. So, you know, on reflection, when we're looking at that point, is it that we were substituting probably some of the things that they would have been getting back from sort of school time or after school engagement, as well as obviously the work that they had to do, but they did seem to enjoy those weekly contact sessions with ourselves, so it's good.
Yeah.
The second one was
what do they think worked well with the engagement over COVID? Because obviously most of the phone calls had to be over the phone, and we couldn't meet them face to face as much. But some of the young people enjoyed the fact that it was over the phone, as it was easier for them. They could just do it from home rather than making the effort of having to meet us. So they actually engaged quite well with the phone calls. So that was a positive. Yeah. So there wasn't much change with the engagement. I actually improved quite a bit, I thought.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And then if I give a response then for the third one, which was, what didn't you like about working with the Youth Justice Service over COVID? Some of the young people did say about how, although they got used to it being over the phone, ideally they would have liked face-to-face, as many of us are already aware. But also we have to acknowledge that there was that sort of nocturnal flip. So one of the respondents said that actually, due to not being in school for that significant period of time, they tended to sleep in the day and they were up at night. So ideally for them, they would have preferred sessions to be at something like 10 o'clock in the evening, which we thought was really interesting. And actually to wake up to hit sort of within office work hours would sometimes cause an argument with parents, because the parents were quite keen for them to engage in it. You know, they were asleep and struggling to sort of wake up for that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the mum was having to wake the young person up to take the call, and then that was causing arguments between the young person and the mum. Yeah, so that was one thing. That was the only thing really, though, that one of the young people raised. As a whole, the young people didn't feel as if there was anything they didn't like about the engagement. Yeah, which was positive. Yeah, but we also acknowledge that for these young people, that all of the young people that engage in this were like first-time entrants to the Youth Justice Service, so they had nothing to sort of compare it to historically. Next one, do you have any recommendations on how the Youth Justice Service can improve their engagement over COVID? So most of them didn't really have any improvements, bar the one girl who thought she would have rather these sessions be at 10 o'clock at night because she was sleeping during the day, which is obviously a bit more trickier for us. Yeah. Because we'd be working during the day. Yeah. And then overall, on how you feel your experience was with the Youth Justice Service. Positive. Really. Positive, really. That was it. Yeah. Bar that one girl, like again, going back to her, she said it just reminded her of being tired all the time because when she'd pick up the phone, it'd be immediately after she woke up. So the whole process just reminds her of being tired. Although she did say the workshop, she did feel help, and she does feel like she's learned a lot around the consequences of crime and some more stuff like that, really. Yeah, yeah. And there was a mix of young people, as in representative of different communities, and young males and females that took part in this. So overall the responses were good, and it was all young person centred, as we say. So it's just unfortunate that we can't literally just because we did have a PowerPoint with all their responses because they went behind the camera, and this was all young people led. Yeah, they set up a camera, they recorded their responses to the questions, put it on a PowerPoint. But I think because they recorded it in 4K, it doesn't mean a lot to us. But for any of you might know, they recorded it in 4K, which is what films are recorded in. So it was really high quality. So the video files were actually too big to go on PowerPoint. Yeah. But we will get it rectified. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for your time. Thank you both very much. That was really interesting. Thanks a lot. And thanks for being willing to step in at the last minute. I know you weren't expecting that. And the problem with the IT arose this morning. So thank you so much. Okay. Cheerio. I hope you'll stay with us in case there are any questions. That would be great. Okay. And I want to go over to Sue Thomas, who's the Head of Innovation and Engagement at Youth Justice Board Cymru. And she's going to just take a few minutes to draw the threads together and maybe draw out some issues or questions that we might like to look at. Over to you, Sue.
Thanks, Kate. Right, sorry, I'm not sure what I'm in control of and what I'm not, but I think that should be okay. It's been so interesting to just listen to everybody on their contributions again. I just feel very humbled by this whole experience, I have to say. And what a success story it's been from a yacht point of view, and how people have personally and professionally adapted to change in, unprecedented times. I think when we went into lockdown in March this year, I was thinking, well, by September, we'll probably be coming out of it and, hopefully looking forward to 2021 with a more normal life. But the reality is we're still very much going through with things changing by the day. I'm struck again by, us not underestimating the challenges that people facing services have had during this period of time. And I think the care, the innovation and commitment, as the inspectorate report says, of youth justice workers and people working in this world that have had towards children and their families. And what it's meant for us as individuals. I was struck by, I think it was Kim talking through children being isolated in their bedrooms, but I think a few of us have been as well, in terms of getting through the working day and finding it as never really realising our bedroom would actually be our office. The inspection reports talked about at-home working rather than working from home, and there's a really significant nuance difference there, isn't there? I think one of the other things that sort of struck me when from today, and also some work that the YJB did with Yacht Managers Cymru, where we did a kind of quick survey, quick engagement with all yachts in Wales to look at how they'd adapted their practice during this period. And one of the things that struck me from that was how yachts had adapted to the needs of the pandemic, if I can put it that way. So helping children and families to understand what the restrictions meant, what they needed to do. The focus on exercise kind of appeared. That was very much kind of an issue at the start of the first lockdown. And it was interesting to see the kind of thing yachts were putting together, you know, exercise classes and challenges for children they were engaged with. Checking on how people were spending their time, and if they were struggling with that time, helping them to find things to do, and supporting those experiencing difficulties. There's been a lot of hardship through the pandemic, and again, I think it was quite humbling to just kind of read and hear of just about, you know, all yachts in one way, shape or form providing support to their local communities and the children and families they know, particularly in providing food, other resources, other help. So for me, I think it's been a story of going the extra mile, really, irrespective of what your position has been in the service, irrespective of what you do, whether you're a part of the core service, whether you're a partner in it. So for me, it's an opportunity to say just a massive, massive thank you. And I think I'd probably also want to say in that a thank you to all the children who've been working with youth offending teams during this time, with all the multiple issues that they've had to face in terms of what the pandemic has meant for them. Yvonne mentioned our collaboration with yachts and the YGB's collaboration with yachts during this period. And I think that has been an absolute strength. We've had regular meetings, been an opportunity to sort of share concerns, interests, all the rest of it. And again, I'd like to echo the generosity of services like Wrexham, and I'd have to say Blaenau Gwent as well, Blaenau Gwent Caerphilly, in sharing some of their early thinking on practices and procedures that, you know, they were happy for others to kind of engage with and learn from. And finally, just picking up from the presentations we've had, I think the one thing that's come through from Davinia, James, Caroline, Kim, Daniel and Joseph is the voice of the child being really important at this time. So Davinia said something like listening to the child is more important than ever at the moment. James talked about how you engage with that and think about that in a sensitive way, particularly when you're thinking about your walk and talks, whether it's in the garden or in the community. Caroline talked about the busy time that we've all had and the frantic switch that we all had to make to working remotely. I know that when I kind of went into this process in March, I thought, great, I'll get through my to-do list. It's actually still there. Kim talked about engaging not just children, but their family and the need to kind of bring them into all of this more strongly, and how successful that's been. And also looked at ways, Newport discussed ways, or Kim particularly, about capturing the voice of the child through the methods in which we're working now. And Daniel and Joseph, I was really glad to hear that importantly, children have enjoyed the contact they've had with the youth justice system and that they've wanted it. And I think we all look forward to seeing the film when it eventually gets uploaded into this presentation. So I think that's my summary. And again, just a massive, massive, massive thank you to you all.
Thanks, Sue. Can you stay on? And if all the other speakers could put their mics and cameras on so that we can see all the speakers, that would be great. Because what I'd like to do now is move into question and answer session. Not many people have put any questions in the chat at the moment, but Mike has. Mike, do you want to ask your question, please? Mike Maguire.
Sorry, yeah, I wasn't expecting to be called upon, but I'll read my question out. Yeah, it's been spoken today about adapting to the situation as it is and has been. But I'm quite interested also, what difference will it make in the future? And you know, some of these practices like walking more with people and all the other things that you've done, and more online contact maybe, a combination of that and face to face. You know, if we look forward 2 or 3 years, do you think practice will have changed, and in what ways, for the good or for the better?
Yvonne, over to you first. You've got your hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm hoping will continue, we saw some quite stark differences and improvements in professionals being able to meet together. So some of those time savings that came from people not having to travel long distances to get to meetings, and that the moving of that onto the virtual means meant that getting hold of people like social workers, and this is, you know, absolutely not a dig at social nation, but professionals being able to come together and meet more rapidly, but meet in larger groups, actually was a real benefit. And we found that in all of the 7 areas that we went to. So one of the things that we're hoping for is that some of that can be continued going forward. It's not always appropriate to do things virtually, but often there are benefits from that. And I think that hesitancy we'd sometimes seen prior to lockdown about using Teams and using Skype has gone now. It is just a new method of working for us. So I'm hoping that continues. So probably that's one of the first things for me. But I can see other people have got their hands up, so I'll stop.
Kim, over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say about the reparation hours, Kate, because we had to be quite innovative about that and rethink things. And I think it's made us think, well, why were we doing it only that way? And so one of the things we've done is we've married up vulnerable groups. So one of our initiatives has been that the young people make friendship bracelets, you know, the little ones that you plait. And then we've partnered them up with care homes for the elderly, and obviously they can't visit there, but they do a little card with them thinking about you, put the friendship bracelet in there. And what our young people have learned is that they didn't know that people lived like that when they were older in homes, and it was quite moving for us. And we also did pamper packs for NHS workers, and the young people got such a lesson from that, is that these people are stopping you get the virus. Do not go out, you know. And so I'm not saying it's all roses round the door, but it certainly made us think again.
And James, anything or Davinia, anything from?
I mean, I'd echo about the attendance of professionals. I'd also say things like, for example, we had a situation with CAMS where disclosure was made in the morning, referral went in by midday, and CAMS had contacted the family by the afternoon. Now, yes, there's the weaknesses because some of that's remote, but that kind of response to that crisis was I mean, I'm so impressed with the way that everyone just sort of did very quickly the things that needed to be done that in the past would have taken days, if not potentially weeks, for that, you know, and it would have been a case of going to A&E if it got any worse, sort of thing. Whereas actually they were speaking to a CAMS nurse in the afternoon, and that issue was nipped in the bud. So that kind of practice I'd like to see as something that we would be looking to do on a more standard basis.
Absolutely, and I'd agree. Sorry, Kate, I'd agree with James there. You know, sort of, there's a lot of things. You know, even and Yvonne was alluding to the number of children who have moved areas and authorities, and in Carmarthenshire we've seen an increase in that. And what we've been holding is, you know, sort of there are risk reviews where you have a number of professionals from the other authority who may not have had a voice previously, sort of bringing into a Teams meeting. So I think that for the future, with regards to risk review or risk management meetings, whatever yachts call them, has been really successful. And I think, as I said earlier, here in Carmarthenshire, due to the reality, due to the fact that our office location is only in one place, we do a lot with children within the locality. So Mike, that won't change. I think the amount of contact that we have with children in their areas will remain, but sort of that other things will remain, I think, in the future. It's interesting because we've come into this pandemic not knowing what we were going, and I think we'll come out of it the other side, very interestingly as well, won't we?
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Daniel, I know you work with the children directly as well. Because you're I think a yacht worker, if I'm correct. Do you have anything to add to what's been said, Daniel or Joseph? Are you there? No, I can't. I don't know where they are. Right. Okay. I'd also like to all of the yachts, and please take this back to Yacht Managers Cymru. I think the yachts in Wales have worked superbly, like as Sue does, and I think you reacted very, very quickly. I suspect more quickly, partly because of the innovation with the link with Youth Justice Board in Wales, which I also think they need to be congratulated for keeping that very powerfully going and making sure you were talking not just within your own yachts, but to each other across the yachts. And I know that took a lot of work through this period. And some of what Sue said in her findings, she was very coy about it, but came from some of the research she did very early on in Wales, which was excellent. So do we have any more questions? I've got one here that's come up separately, but perhaps one question to ask would be about services and their responses to the pandemic. You've spoken about better partnerships, a lot of you. Do you see that as something that's likely to continue, these stronger partnerships, these quicker reactions from other services in your area? Yes, no? Because they sound like they were powerfully necessary in order to deliver properly. Caroline, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be very remiss of us to go backwards, to be honest. You know, what Jane talked a little bit about in terms of people coming together, things getting done much more quickly. We've seen massive improvements in attendance at risk management and vulnerabilities panels, for example, where previously attendance, getting that buy-in from colleagues in CP teams or safeguarding teams. You know, everybody is so busy, and I think the detriment of that was some people would not get to routine meetings, but meetings that were very, very important to our world. But actually, in this world now, what we've seen is attendance has gone up probably, I would say, 100%. Kim regularly reports to me and tells me how good attendance is and how innovative the discussions are around how do we manage risk, how do we support children to keep safe. You know, we will be absolutely failing in our duty as professionals to go backwards and take that any other way, but maintain and continue to build on those very strong partnerships.
Great. And Yvonne, you want to come in as well, or yeah?
Yeah, two things I'd say to that. Every yacht that we kind of came into contact with, and the yachts that we've come into contact since on our inspection programme, have all done some kind of taking stock, so learning from this period. Called different things, but what worked well, what do you want to retain, what should we change for the future? So there's definitely that drive to kind of keep those good things going, which is good. But the other thing that I'd say is it strikes me that this has been an opportunity where public services and professionals and children and parents actually probably for the first time have all been through something together and experienced the same thing. And I think for some families that actually has begun to reshape their perspective of what public services are about. So whereas in the past, very much as professionals, we've kind of gone in at the point of crisis, the way that we've done that now, and lots of done that now, has been really providing some of that very practical support in crisis. And it sounds easy to say, doesn't it, about delivering food parcels to families, but I think it's helped families see us as professionals in a different way. And I'm really hoping that we can continue with that as time goes on. But it's very hard to capture that in an inspection, if I'm honest. It's really hard to, but that's very much a sense of that. So it'd be good to try and kind of capitalise on that, I think.
Excellent. And I know it says Daniel on the screen, but I believe it's Joseph there.
Yeah. Hi. So, well, as you can imagine, in Cardiff at the minute, and I know this is slightly outside of this, but it's not because it's all connected. It's some of our higher risk young people that we have managed on our caseloads have of particular concern are on the periphery of the ongoing incidents in Cardiff. Saturday night and yesterday, and weapons carrying. But it is slightly aside from the young people that engage in this cohort. However, I was hoping that one of the young people that are particularly managed quite closely over this period was going to take part in it, but because of the nature and the characteristics of, they decided not to. However, what is really impressive, even though there's lots of high risk panels and is a particular personal concern, there's lots of NRMs, national referral mechanisms, and exploitation concerns, very vulnerable, particularly young males, but not just exclusively to gender it, because there's young females of concern. But the knife carrying culture, the weapons, and that normalised kind of weapons carrying, which reflects other cities, which tended to be targeted, or not targeted, labelled with, you know, danger and risk perception and so forth. But over this COVID period, it has been very interesting managing these young people, but the collaborative work that's gone on, multi-agency service, wide information sharing, which has been key and crucial. And I know things are heightened in Cardiff as we speak. There's risk meetings going on all over the place. But I do think that, you know, there's been some brilliant work. Now, the one thing that I just want to relate that is very interesting is this paradox, the paradox between some of these young people involved in these highly exploitative environments, high risk environments, and at the same time, they would like to enter into education, but because a lot of it's been online, and with certain training providers who've really helped to sort of manage their risk, because they present a risk to other students and things, yes, but the online basis of work has really helped them to engage with programs as long as they have the internet access and so forth. So it's almost like that's worked in some of these young people's favours, which is an irony. It's a strange positive. But at the same time, they're still floating with escalating up into the criminal justice system, potentially custody, some of them. But, you know, so it's very fascinating, very fascinating. And there we go. Sorry, I ranted, but, you know, it's all interesting.
Right. Anybody want to add anything?
I think on a similar note, I think what we found with some children is some of those children that, and again, you know, obviously the caveat about the home not always being a safe environment, but for some children that really liked clear structure, rules, boundaries, we found the initial period of time, they responded very well to it because it was very clear what was expected. It was very clear, you know, not all of them, and there was and I think as the pandemic has changed and shifted and it looks different, we've, you know, some of those more normal behaviours have returned. But I think initially when we had pre-existing relationships with children, the change to working remotely was quite seamless because they were happy to engage, they knew the staff, they worked well with staff, and they responded well to the messages about for a certain section of them, which again was initially our feeling was this was going to be very, very difficult and was going to present us all sorts of problems because they're not going to follow the rules, they're not going to stick. This is going to be another problem on top of all the other problems. Whereas for some children, it was a pleasant surprise about the way they responded and managed it.
Excellent. Anybody else want to add anything? Okay. Ursula, I know she's had to leave, but Ursula asked, what's been the experience of inspections for all of you? And I know Yvonne is still here, so it may be difficult to answer that one. But I know inspections from talking in Hwdwyth to a lot of youth justice workers that they are very, very stressful. And has the stress been lowered or heightened during COVID-19? What have been your experiences?
Well, obviously Davinia, the team manager, she's probably got a different perspective to me, but I think we're very aware that one's potentially coming, but I think this is another opportunity, or it's been an opportunity to think about our practice anyway, and what we do and why we do it, which, you know, that's inspection sometimes helps you do that, but this has been another focus to drive that. But I think staff have very much bought into that process. So actually the process of looking at why do we not email out letters to parents? Why does it have to be in the post? So tiny little things like that, you know, why do we do that form? Do we need to do that form? Why is it not always being put online rather than bits of paper floating around? Very, very small bits to think, but I think that the whole process of the pandemic and reviewing, looking what we're doing has given us that opportunity. And I think that ties in potentially to inspection and knowing that people are going to come along and look at your practice. So I think for us, it's as a sort of senior practice management team, that's given us another focus to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, and I'd just like to come in there really just to sort of echo what James is saying, because, you know, before we came into the pandemic as yachts, we were looking at sort of the national standards audit, but before that was launched, we were preparing for inspection. So there's been a lot of demand on yachts, and I think, you know, if you've had a new member of staff starting in the middle of a pandemic, and in Carmarthenshire we have not returned to the office whatsoever, so all of the staff have been working from home since March. Without having been back to the office, apart from photocopying or whatever it may be. But, you know, to induct that member of staff in all things yacht, jargon and everything else from home has, as James said, made us reflect on how we present things to staff. How do staff improve their practice? What's good practice for us within a yacht? So that's brought, you know, a lot of work on top of the busy day by day sort of, you know, cases and everything else, risk management that goes on. But I think, you know, it's good that a yacht reflects on all of that and tries to improve everything, not just for staff, but for families, children, victims, and other partnerships as well.
Joseph, you had your hand up first, and then I'll come to Caroline.
No, sorry, I probably.
Oh, okay, so it's an historic hand up. So yeah. Caroline, over to you.
It's just a point on inspections, really. It's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because when I came into youth justice world in Newport, what I felt was this sort of entrenched fear of inspections and almost legacy of past failings and poor inspections. And I felt quite strongly that a lot of that legacy was getting in the way of progressing good practice and actually doing all the things that Davinia and James had just talked about, which is actually, regardless of inspections, good services should always be looking at how can we improve what we do and do the very best we can with what we've got for the best outcome for our children. But actually, I felt the agenda was very driven back at the time I started, was around it's all about inspections. And that didn't fit right for me. I understand inspections are very much part of this world and an important part of this world, but I'd like it to be a culture of shared learning and shared understanding, as opposed to being a punitive punishment, low morale process that leaves teams absolutely devastated and on the floor. So certainly that would be my personal wish. We haven't been inspected during this period, but as I've just explained, even before COVID, and with the arrival of Kim coming on board to support me taking the team forward in the way that I wanted to, we've really been able to strip the team back to core basics, basic practice, safeguarding, good social work practice, and actually build back up again. And within that, we've taken the team with us. And I think if we were to be inspected today, I'd like to think that stuff is the stuff that will get recognised. And I'd like to think that when we are inspected, or any service is inspected, actually they're inspected for being aware and identifying what needs to be improved and actually have a plan to do something about it. I think when there isn't any acknowledgement or any awareness that services are perhaps a bit stuck or could be improved, I think that is a real purpose for those inspections. But I think things have changed a lot in my view. I think the landscape has changed somewhat for youth justice. The voice of the child first method, all of those things are absolutely promoting our services, I think, to be seen in a bit of a different light. So that's my view on inspections. I'd like to think it's a learning, supportive process, and not how it's been certainly presented to me when I first arrived. And it shouldn't be a barrier to actually improving what we're offering from our services. So, you know, I will be very happy, and I'm not saying I will welcome an inspection today, Yvonne, but very happy to have those discussions with inspectors, because actually I do think there's something about shared learning in terms of the impact of inspections on services and teams that are left behind following the inspection.
Yeah, no, if I could comment on that, You know, I absolutely kind of understand kind of where you're coming from with that. There's a couple of things I'd say about this particular inspection, this thematic. We did think long and hard about whether the time was right to do that inspection. So one of the things that we did was the youth offending services that we went out to, we had a very early meeting with them and just posed that question and said, we'd like to do this piece of work, but we don't know whether now is the right time to do it. And I have to say, we had overwhelming support from the sector to undertake this piece of work. Very much youth offending services felt that there was a real story to tell here, and it was a good time to capture. If we didn't capture it now, we'd miss it. I have to say it was a very different response. We had a parallel programme looking at adult probation work during this period, and there was a very, very different response. There was an awful lot of pushback, although the inspection did go ahead. So we were very grateful for services, and what we've tried to do is really do this inspection in collaboration. We've learned a lot from it. So instead of coming in and kind of holding, you know, kind of saying we've got standards around this, what we did, we came in and said, we don't know what it's like out there. We need you to tell us, and we need you to teach us about what this is like. And that was the approach that we've taken. And I'm hopeful that was part of the success of the inspection, really, and that we're able to kind of take that approach. The other thing I'd say is that our Chief Inspector, Justin Russell, is very much focused on service improvement. So one of the things that he's done, he's developed, he's kind of really strengthened our research arm. So it's slightly separate from the inspection arm, because you've got to be able to kind of keep that objectivity. But for example, the week before last, we've published an academic insight written by Carleen Furman about contextual safeguarding. So that's on our website, and we've got a long list of topics that what we're doing is we're commissioning leaders within the academic field to do a piece of research around evidence base, and that is absolutely designed to support the work that's going on within youth offending services. We constantly look at try and kind of address the tone of inspection, so that we're trying to kind of look at the wider picture and trying to kind of hold that. Good inspection holds up that mirror, doesn't it, in terms of service provision, and shows you the things that you're doing well, and usually for most services kind of reflects the things that you already know about your services. But it is tricky to get that balance. I absolutely accept that, and I will take those comments back to Justin, of course, but we will continue to try and get that better, is what I can say.
Looking from outside and listening to what's been said, it sounds like this inspection was done very much with, not on, whereas most of your inspections are on the yachts, and it would be really nice to see if I might be talking out of turn, but everybody who knows me knows that I do that. HMIP, it would be lovely to see them move towards that partnership type of inspection, so that giving yachts the chance to their services themselves as well, rather than doing it to them, doing it with them. And I think then there would be a lot of different reactions and feelings about inspections in the future.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think that's very, very valid. No, very valid.
I also note that Kim has said something really interesting in the chat here about 3 staff that they had to induct during, and I'm sure a number of yachts and yosses have had to induct staff during this period, and that must be really difficult for staff starting.
Yeah, it was incredibly, and that's one of the reasons we started the Wellbeing Forum, because we suddenly thought we employed the young girl before we'd thought about that, and because you've got your induction in place, we suddenly thought, oh, well, are we gonna meet her then? So we've got the social distancing in place at the civic centre, which means only 3 per team can go in the room. So we sort of used her immediate supervisor and one other in her little sub team to meet her, and then we quickly got this Teams thing together, which was much more informal. And I mean, it's worked really well, but I still think, oh my God, you just didn't think about it, I just never occurred to us really, but it has proved, like Davinia was saying, it's just awful, really. Imagine joining a place for a job and never meeting the team. It's not something we've ever contemplated, so it has been hard. But
I also like the idea of well-being for your staff, because in the regional hub Doith meetings, quite a lot of what's been brought by various youth justice teams is the feeling by staff that they need something.
Yeah, there's only one rule on ours, and it's that a manager mustn't facilitate. So a manager can attend, but they can't facilitate. So, you know, I've actually been belly laughing at some of the things, showing Christmas hats. Look at what I've drawn. Look at, it's just like school, but it's what's needed. And then, you know, one guy saying, I just can't cope with my kids anymore. Somebody look after them for me.
Honestly, it's lovely, isn't it?
But it's really helpful, you know.
Yeah, and I'd echo Kim's sentiments there. We've done the same, you know, in Carmarthenshire, and we've even virtual Christmas calendar going, sort of in order to sort of give some hope running up to Christmas. But yeah, we've got the weekly tea breaks, as we call them, as well as catch up. So we've got 2 weekly catch ups at the moment, but one is a tea break, and as Kim says, it's not my agenda whatsoever. So it's very important, you know, staff morale. We can't thank staff enough during this, and for what they've done with children at home, and also, you know, sort of responding to other children's needs. It's incredible, really. So I take my hat off to all your staff who, and you know, if you remember back at the beginning of the pandemic, people were afraid. People knew nothing of this virus, so we were sending staff out, PPE'd to the max, but sort of, you know, still extremely cautious. So yes.
Yeah, I think on that note, we better stop. We've gone over time, and I found it absolutely fascinating. One of the things that I think for me was interesting, and I hadn't expected, was the different relationship with the family that's come out. And that, I think, is a really interesting one to take forward. And I know there've been negatives, because there's been more violence in both directions, parent on child and child on parent. And you need to be really careful, particularly when you conducting those virtual meetings. Make safeguarding and all of that must be much more difficult. But to see the family more engaged, that can only, in most cases, be a positive for the future. And that's something that I would like to see retained. It seemed to be a really sensible way forward. I'd really like to thank all of you. For participating and for sharing your knowledge with us. Is there anything else anybody wants to say, particularly Sue? Do you want to come back in at all? You've been very quiet there. No, okay. I can't hear you, Sue. Sue, I can't hear you, sorry.
No, it's Miss, sorry. You've got 10 steps before you can speak, aren't there?
Yeah.
No, it's just, I think everybody's had far more interesting things than I've had to say, and I'm just, you know, can't get enough of listening to it and, you know, hearing about all the things that you're doing. So, yeah, no, absolutely fascinating. And Kate, I would just like to say thank you to you and the Welsh Centre for facilitating this session. Just looking at the chat on the side, so many people have found it interesting and valuable and enjoyed taking part. So thank you on behalf of us all, I think.